Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around you're in for a bit of a double cast, with this first game mostly just being to demonstrate a bit of cheese and perhaps a little bit of a few tips essentially on how to deal with cheese, because this was MP here at Ridge here. We get Chaos against Hiles, and as you can see the Hiles went with like a super elite campy flyer style, and yeah, I basically just wanted to drop a few tips on if you ever run into cheese on ladder. Sometimes you won't be able to win on against this sort of stuff, but you usually can give it a fair shake, especially if it's somewhat well-rounded build. And so I just want to discuss that a little bit. The next match is much more legit. I think it's Tomb Kings against Bretonia, or perhaps a little more, yeah, I guess a little more of a legit match. But regardless, going into this one, we're going in as Hile, so I decided to go with a somewhat well-rounded build. I brought Kolek Sun Eater for my Lord. He does have Stormcaller, he's got Standard Die, and of course Foe Seeker. Obviously he's a pretty beastly Lord in close quarters. He's got very solid stats, despite the nerf to armor. The fact that his price has gone up by 100. He's still a very solid combatant that you don't want to mess with. And the anti-large is pretty useful if you need to deal with Dragon Princes or big enemy lords. Basically, most lords you're going to fight are going to be on a mount of some sort, so having that anti-large is going to be good. Alongside him, a Chaos Sorcerer of Death. These guys are actually useful for a few reasons. First of all, Fate of Buna lets me nuke a single elite unit if I need to. Spirit Leech also lets me target, say, single models like Alariel. You can chip her down a bit. Otherwise, you can chip off models on, say, the Fireborn. You can take off 7 or 8 or so models every time you cast it, which is pretty nice. For my front line here, I had to go a little bit on a budget, so it's a bunch of Chaos Warriors with 3 weapons, as well as the Mirror Guard. So these guys do have immunity to psychology. These guys will not do great if my opponent, say, goes with straight Swordmasters, but in that situation I have to use Fate of Buna, I've got to use Kolek, I've got to use my Dragon Ogres over here, the Summoners of Rage, and chip them down with some Marauder Horsemasters before closing the distance if my opponent went with a super elite infantry build. But otherwise, these guys will do well against everything else. White Lions, Spearmen, and of course lower end High Elf Infantry, they'll still do well against. 2 units of Chaos Warhounds as well as 3 units of Marauder Horsemasters are here to chip away at Illyrian Reavers, push them away, pressure dragons, and that sort of stuff. I do really think they're pretty solid in this matchup. Marauder Horsemasters do lose, I think, to Illyrian Reaver Archers in a straight-up fight. But if you manage to whittle them down a little bit, if you manage to get some decent trades in early on, they can do really well. So that's my build. My opponent, he went full cheese. Not quite the cheese I would expect, but he did bring a bunch of flyers. You can see Star Dragon, Moon Dragon, Alariel with a battery of healing spells. She's got Fau's Protection, she's got, well, she actually brought Banishment, which makes sense. If I blob up on top of her, this is a great ability. Earthblood, Arcane Unforging, Star of Avalorn, Arcane Conduit, all that sort of stuff. Of course, she does have her buff, give the Boon of Isha, as well as Shields of Isha, granting all those buffs there. A Frostheart Phoenix to debuff me in a blob. Moon Dragons, Star Dragon, Keepers of the Flame, and the Fireborn here. So pretty interesting sort of hyper elite build. And definitely a bit cheesy. Probably looking to get a few breath attacks in, perhaps whittle down a specific target, dive in, and potentially knock out a unit real quick. For example, my Chaos Sorcerer of Death here, who is mounted on a horse, is obviously very susceptible to getting goomed out. Now, obviously you can see how many troops your opponent has. So the first thing I did here was I checked how many troops my opponent did have on the field. I knew he had 4 monsters that were visible, so I figured that with 120 models left, I figured he had 2 Shadow Warriors. As it turned out, it was the Fireborn and the Keepers of the Flame, which is a little bit of an odd combo, not something you see every time. But I decided, you know what, I can risk pushing out. Whatever my opponent has hidden, it's not enough of a threat to me to not be able to push out. You can see we're kind of inching our way forward. Kolek and the Dragon Ogre mob kind of sitting around. We are shifting our Horsemasters to try to keep some attacks going, or set up some attacks here. Get a few pot shots there on the Fireborn. But more importantly, as Alariel is going to come in, she's going to get absolutely pounded by the Horsemasters, which is really good. My opponent is diving very aggressively onto the Chaos Sorcerer of Death here. We're going to hit Alariel with a Spirit Leech, and although she is casting immediately, she's casting Fau's Protection, she's looking to goon out my caster, because if she gets rid of my caster, then her Keepers of the Flame are relatively safe for a little bit. They can hold out okay. The Fireborn are relatively safe from Fate of Buna, and potentially she's in a good spot. So you can see huge focus going in, but my Horsemasters are going to be able to disentangle themselves pretty shortly. You can see a Star of Avalorn going down, providing a monstrous heal in an AoE. But we are going to be able to disengage here shortly with our Horsemasters and just pepper Alariel down. That is the main focus right now. Pinning in these dragons, pinning in these big models, preventing them from escaping, beating them down with our Dragon Ogres, beating them down with Kolek, and getting rid of Alariel, because she is such a nasty threat. You can see all those javelins pouring in. She's the main focus of our aggro right now. You can see she's already hit her healing cap almost. Does pop an Earthblood before getting routed off, but we will be able to remove her from play now, and that is crucial. With these sort of monster builds, you cannot have your opponent running around with a healer and these monsters, because he can get so much value out of the Moondragon and Star Dragon if he gets them back up into the air with Alarielle. Chaos Sorcerer of Death coming back in. Huge mistake here. I was trying to just chase Alarielle off the field. We do actually land a nice little hit there. Javelins pouring in on her. She's not quite able to go in. Now, huge mistake on my part here. I should have taken a unit of Marauder Horsemasters, got into melee, and chased her off the map that way, but unfortunately I do not, and that is definitely a misplay. In the meantime, though, with my opponent's healing and that supporting power removed from the field, it is now just a Moondragon, Star Dragon, and Froststar Phoenix against the power of Spirit Leech, Kolek, and a Horde of Dragon Ogres. So suddenly that's very bad. The 2 Javelins here are going to stick around and keep pounding away. And at this point, we're in a pretty good spot. You can see the Keepers of the Flame here doing a great job because I played like trash. And what you should do here is I really should have pivoted these guys out wide and come in from the flank. I'm finally doing it with this unit, but honestly, these guys are getting way too much value here. Over here, the Poison Warhounds do take one for the team and crash into the Fireborn, but you can see we are able to remove the Moondragon from play, get it off the field there, and the Star Dragon actually also getting pretty badly pounded up here. So my opponent's build, definitely struggling. Alarielle here is going to be chased off by the Marauder Horsemasters. Always useful to have these fast units on the field. And the Froststar Phoenix is sticking around, but we are going to be able to get a nice Spirit Leech on the Fireborn, start removing models from them. I didn't have the Winds of Magic for Fate of Buna, so we're going to start removing some models here. And the Spirit Leech just doing work. The Dragon Ogres are very susceptible to Fireborn, but Kolek, fortunately, with his 95 armor, is kind of tanky. He's definitely resistant, and he's able to take off multiple models with each swing there. In the meantime, our Marauder Horsemasters are coming back in. We are harassing the Star Dragon, harassing the Froststar Phoenix, trying to get some value there. We get a nice little Chain Lightning over here on top of the Keepers of the Flame, and you can see they just get roasted. Unfortunately, so do some of my Chaos Warriors, but you can see kind of meanders around and explode some of these guys. You can see them blowing up into a little flame there. But with the Keepers of the Flame so badly crippled now, we're going to be able to easily pincer them and mop them up. The Moondragon is pretty messed up, and my opponent's build, which is so reliant on healing, is now not really going to be able to do very much. He should have probably casted a heal here on Alarielle, try to keep her tip-top. But as you can see, we are trying to zone her off. Unfortunately, my Deathcaster there running for dear life. But here you can see we are trying to get a pincer maneuver on Alarielle, prevent her from getting back with their dragon buddies. And we are pressuring these guys pretty heavily. You can see the Moondragon there, losing hundreds of HP. Alarielle here takes a volley from the Javelins. The high velocity on the Javelins compared to Axe is so useful here. And she's going to rout before she gets into range. My opponent's ground force is completely shattered. You can see the Fireborn route off the field. The Phoenix Guard also shattered. And at this point, my opponent is forced to GG out. As he's suffered, now he's only got flyers. So, is this necessarily the most brutal kite or cheese strat you're ever going to face? No, it's not. Not by any means or in any stretch of the imagination. There's far worse stuff you can run into. Heavy Shadow Warrior plus flyer builds are absolutely frustrating to play against. Illyrian Reaver plus this sort of cancerous flying play. Very common, very annoying. What else is there? You can run into if you're playing, for example, against Wood Elves, they'll sometimes do these sort of cheese strats. The main thing is to keep your cool, not rush out immediately and sort of YOLO into your opponent's firing line right away. Sit, sort of analyze the situation a bit, try to figure out what you need to do, and push out from there, I think, and then try to knock out critical targets. Oftentimes, a lot of these cheese builds, if you potentially can take out a few blocks of the cheese build, it can fall apart. For example, here, by removing Alarielle the Radiant, the rest of the build here really couldn't stand up. And like I said, I'm not saying this is the most competitive cheese build there is, but you will run into this sort of stuff somewhat often, and definitely if you can, for example, remove Alarielle from the field, or you can remove a key building block or a key component of these comps, then you can often get huge value that way. So regardless, that was one game, and without further ado, let's hop on to another one that's actually kind of legit. So this time around, we are on Prague for some Tomb King against Bretonnia action, and I decided to go a little wider on the shooting for once, and I wanted to try out a slightly more shooting heavy build than what I usually do. For my Lord here, I did decide to roll with High Queen Khalida. Of course, she's got her AoE buffs. She does have some decent perks compared to Cetra. For example, you get the Tomb Strike, which gives you temporary terror. Cetra obviously can get permanent terror with some of his mount choices, but it costs much more. And the main thing is I wanted a Light Mage to get Net of Mintok, so I didn't really care for Cetra's magic abilities. Venom Staff, of course, which is a decent ability. You can definitely nuke some blobs with it. My Will Be Done, of course. Okay, buff. Blessing of Asaph, good for buffing your shooting. I probably should have had it a little closer to my shooting here, but I kind of spaced them out anyway, so it wasn't going to get huge value. And then alongside that, Lich Priest of Light. He does have Net of Mintok, as well as the Nefarious Scrolls of Mighty Incantations, and a Files Protection. So, basically looking to root down critical targets, focus them down with Ushabti Great Bows, and my Bone Giant here. I do have 3 units of Ushabti Great Bows. Bretonnia, very susceptible to that sort of stuff. It's one of the things that, I think one of the reasons they do struggle against Tomb Kings, as well as Skaven to an extent, is because you have these actions that can go with lots of Super Chief Chaff, they can get lots of width, and some really heavy-duty artillery play or heavy-duty shooting play that can annihilate your cav very, very quickly. And it's not short-range shooting play. Let's say Empire or Wood Elves. To be honest, Wood Elves have overly expensive chaff for that, but still. Other factions that might have good shooting, but it's more short-ranged or more close-in, Bretonnians can deal with a lot better. But things like Ushabti with 250 range, Bone Giants with 500 or with 350 range, they're pretty good at just picking off cav. It's pretty brutal. For the front line here, 2 Tomb Guard. These guys will annihilate squishy low-end Bretonnian infantry. They'll do okay against even Foot Squires and Battle Pilgrims and that sort of stuff. Tomb Guard, just an amazing infantry. Honestly, right up there alongside Graveguard and Chaos Warriors, in my opinion, for one of the best 750 gold infantry units in the game. Skeleton Spears on the periphery. For most part, we do have a single unit of Tomb Guard Halberds in the back. Obviously, we do want some anti-large protection to defend against cav. But the main thing for these guys is just to zone out my opponent. We can have a bit of supplementary cover with our Lich Priest here, but obviously we don't want to let my opponent get in here and get on top of my Ushabti and that sort of stuff. Now for my opponent here, he did decide to go with a very wide infantry build for most part. He did bring the Fanchantress here. She is mounted on Sylvaron. She does have Regrowth and Earthblood. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Regrowth for Bretonnia right now. I think that either your cav's too cheap to bother, or your cavalry already has perfect vigor, so you're kind of better off with Earthblood in my opinion. Regardless, she is of course still a very potent force. She's got Chalice of Potions, Favor of the Fae, Arcane Conduit, Life Bloom, and I'll Miss the Lady, all that good stuff. First front line, my opponent has a bunch of Peasant Moms to break up charges, to soak up chariots, that sort of stuff. A bunch of Foot Squires behind that. These guys will trade fairly effectively with Tomb Guard. I'm not entirely sure how well they'll actually trade, because their AP is kind of wasted on Tomb Guard, and they don't actually have the best armor themselves, and Tomb Guard does hit pretty hard, and these guys have pretty bad melee stats in general. Behind that, 3 units of Peasant Bowmen, all with fire arrows. These guys are very brutal. They'll annihilate the cheaper, even through the Silver Shields, they will annihilate the cheaper skeleton units. They'll annihilate... they're actually a huge threat to your lords who are fire vulnerable, especially casters like this Lich Priest. Despite being inaccurate, these guys will do some brutal amounts of damage. Up in the air, my opponent does have 2 Paladins. These guys, of course, have anti-large, and on the Pegasus, they're very mobile. Single unit of Knights Errant over there. Then we do have the Defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis and Grail Knights over there. So Grail Knights giving us nice little elite anti-large option, which I think is a good idea. And then the Defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis, a cheap backline shutdown. As my opponent does start pushing in here, probably trying to aggressively shut down my Ushabti, you can see I'm going to fire a shot there with the Bone Giant, just shooting at the Foot Squires, because I didn't really have a good target initially. But we are shortly going to open fire on the Paladins. You can see they're going to turn around and reconsider some of their life choices here as they start getting shot at. Ushabti, very precise, very efficient at doing some damage here. But as my opponent is trying to get in, what we're actually going to do is we're going to pull out here with our Lich Priest, who does, of course, have net. That's one of the nice things, having Lore of Light. You can always net people down. So while this Paladin is juking back and forth like a boss, we are going to channel a net on him and shut him down. And suddenly he is in the firing arc of 3 units of Ushabti Great Bows, and he is in for a world of hurt. You can see hundreds of HP being ticked down in seconds. Just not good. They're going to get at least 2 volleys in before this net expires. Earthblood does go down. Probably should have been a Regrowth, to be honest. If you bring it, might as well go with Regrowth. But the Paladin does get just annihilated here in the space of seconds by those Ushabti Great Bows. In the meantime, we are repositioning our spears, trying to make sure to be in an interception course with the Cav. Our Bone Giant over there chipping away at the Grail Knights, taking down 4 models there. The Bone Giant's penetration is really good at dealing with units such as this. And you're going to get some good value there. Unfortunately, the Peasant Bows with fire arrows are being absolute nuisance. You can see the Paladin there actually shattered by the Ushabti fire. But although the Grail Knights are losing models here and there, definitely taking some hurt, my opponent is countering. He's pushing in with the Foot Squires. He is definitely hurting my Tomb Guard. The Peasant Bows here are going to start shooting. You can't see Khalida is in there, but Khalida can't stay there. Despite 90 armor, those Peasant Bows with fire arrows will annihilate her if she sits tight there and tries to fight the Fae Enchantress. So we're going to pull away like a bunch of cowards. As a Rashapti promptly turn their attentions to these Knights Errant, who are a very immediate threat. Now, certainly, a single unit of Knights Errant, it probably isn't going to mess up my Rashapti for good, but I do need them removed from the field. I can't afford to have them shutting down my shooting in the late game. Elsewhere, in the meantime, the Grail Knights here getting torn apart. My opponent trying to sneak through here, trying to get in there with the defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis, but we've got our nets off cooldown at this point, and we are going to net them down seconds before getting in. Unfortunately, the Paladin does dive down here, hitting my Rashapti Greatbow in the flank, so definitely a little bit of a nuisance. But High Queen Khalida, once again, on the case, going to be able to pivot around and go after him. So although my Tomb Guard here is kind of disrupted, kind of all over the place, we are able to do some major damage. The Paladin there getting torn apart. You can see the Grail Knights there losing more models, constantly being peppered down. And, the Paladin just not having a good time of things. In the meantime, Rashapti are going to be able to pivot around and start shooting him in the flank. Of course, Rashapti pretty tanky against Bowfire, or Peasant Bowfire. And, I'm not entirely sure what they were shooting at there. I think the Knights Errant initially, but with the Paladin taking off. But you can see we're going to be able to be forced to reposition here shortly because of the Foot Squires and our Spears not being in position to help. So it's definitely a bit of a hectic defensive situation. My opponent is focusing me very hard with his archers. You can see the Bone Giant there up to 38 kills now. And my opponent trying to nail High Queen Khalida with the Paladin because she is very low at this point. And getting her would probably be good. That said, I do want to note, you can see these guys actually routed, poor guys. But I do want to note just how well the front line here is holding. The Tomb Guards, certainly, they've been fighting a lot of peasants. They actually rat off some peasant bows here. But they've also been fighting Foot Squires, and they're actually trading really well into them. Foot Squires only up to about 20 kills. Honestly, given that the peasant mob hasn't even lost half their troops. Seriously, one unit of Tomb Guard is taking these Foot Squires down by 50 or so models. Tomb Guard is no joke, guys. It can definitely trade pretty well with units such as this, so definitely don't underestimate them. Over here, High Queen Khalida does nail the Paladin. He gets netted and then gets focused pretty hard by the Rashaptis. And of course, Fae Enchantress is not available to heal him. I think she's chasing the Tomb Guard over here, trying to prevent them from compromising the backline. So Paladin Boy here is dead. And although he's going to be able to take off and escape the Rashapti pressure, mostly because we start firing at the Knights Errant, he is at this point effectively useless. Another proc of our Realm of Souls does go off, but our front line's still holding well. The Foot Squires here getting bogged down by spears. And although my first units of Skeleton Spears are starting to crumble and fall away, my opponent simply does not have the tools to really shut down all this Tomb Guard, shut down all these troops, and really compromise us. You can see these Foot Squires here now getting pounded by the Rashapti Greatbows, who are just able to wail on them. They're so tight and packed up, and really easy to shoot here. So they're not having a good time with things. The big problem with Foot Squires is kind of their low melee attack. They don't actually have the good melee attack to begin with, even with their bonus versus infantry. It's only in the mid-30s, so a little lackluster. But now the Fae Enchantress trying to push through, getting pounded by Rashapti Greatbows. Bone Giant would be a waste here because he does do magic damage, so she has like 75% resistance to that. But we are able to remove the Grail Knights and the defenders from the field. We are able to pound these Foot Squires into submission with Tomb Strike. We're going to be able to force her out here, probably. And that is going to be essentially game. These Tomb Guard here are still pursuing, trying to catch these Peasant Bows, trying their little hearts out. But look at, basically unbuffed, these Tomb Guard have held the line here, pounded these Foot Squires into dust, and done some monstrous work. My opponent does get his Paladin back here, who promptly takes a hit from the Bone Giant, and is forced to reconsider his life decisions. And that is basically going to be game. As we'll shortly see, the Paladin there, I think actually, no, he doesn't get killed, he routes off. But at this point, my opponent has essentially reduced a bunch of peasants, some Foot Squires, and that is basically it. It's going to be army losses at this stage. So Pyrrhic victory for the Tomb Kings. Now, this is a tough matchup for Bretonnia. I've done a few videos before on different builds you can try to run. I think I've even done some live casts where I did Bretonnia against Tomb Kings. It's definitely a tough one. Personally, if I were to give recommendations on how to deal with this, I think Lewin's actually a better way to go than Fae Enchantress. Tomb Kings are not... So Fae Enchantress has more Ascension effect. It's really good against factions that tend to blob up. It's really good against factions that rely heavily on healing, because healing generally involves blobbing in this game. Fae Enchantress is really good in this, and she does provide a cheap healing, but she's not that great in combat and against big monsters, and she is obviously susceptible to shooting herself. She does have to be pretty close to the front line to really be contributing, which is not necessarily great. So she definitely has disadvantages there, and I think you're better off with Lewin in this matchup, personally. I suppose going over my build first, though. I did just go ranting on the Enchantress for a bit. But first, just hopping over to my build. You can see the Tomb Guard trading immensely well, 165 and 134 kills. Now, certainly my opponent wasn't getting ideal engagements with the Foot Squires. It was kind of favorable setups for me. But he was just not able to cut through the Tomb Guard. The Tomb Guard, 2 chevrons gained here. These guys didn't gain a chevron, but 165 kills. Certainly, a lot of that was against peasant bowmen and stuff. My opponent kind of lost track of him a bit, but immense work from the Tomb Guard. They're such a potent unit, and I think that as Bretonia, you're better off not bothering with Foot Squires because of that. But either way, Tomb Guard doing a great job. Spears just held. Certainly, we lost a unit of them. Certainly, some of them got mauled, but they held okay. They stalled my opponent's cav. They bought me time. Same thing with the Tomb Guard with halberds. So they were preventing the Grail Knights from just diving into the back line. The Ushabti Great Bows doing a great job. 23, 23, 29 kills, so good kill counts. More importantly, they knocked out a Paladin immediately. Then they managed to focus out 2 Knights Errant, essentially. And they really forced my opponent's hand. They kind of forced him to make a decision, forced him to make a move. The Bone Giant annihilating those Grail Knights was incredibly crucial. Just getting huge value. Now, personally, to be honest, I'm not sure if I was better off bringing Bone Giant or if I would have been better off bringing a 4th unit of Ushabti Great Bows and using the spare change to get more Skeleton Spears. Perhaps that would be better. But the Bone Giant definitely did some major work here, and I think it's undeniable that it basically annihilated the Grail Knights and definitely gained a chevron. Now, but going over to the Bretonian side of things, and what I kind of recommend here as a build, I don't think the Paladin Enchantress is really what you mean. I know some people say bring Paladins for anti-large. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that. Paladins don't have AP, which means that if you get stuck against higher armored lords or units, honestly, even Ushabti can tank you a little bit, and they're not a very good straight-up combat unit, the Ushabti Great Bows. But even they'll survive a few hits from Paladin, and I think you're better off with Lewin. I think Lewin's a good choice in this matchup because Lewin provides you with AP. He provides you with an AoE debuff that you can really use, get huge value out of. Getting the Sword of Corone down is really nice. Lewin does have the shield, the Lion's Shield, which grants him survivability against missiles and magic projectiles. Essentially, something like a Bone Giant can't even hurt him as long as that's active, which is really nice. He does, of course, have his own built-in regen. And, yeah, so I think that's better. And you don't really need the Enchantress's Mortis Engine aura, in my opinion, in this matchup to win. Because it's not... Tomb Kings don't have only one source of healing, and it's not a very good source of healing. At least for their infantry. They do have the Necrotech source, but that's for monsters, in which case Enchantress isn't going to help with her mist. So, you're not looking to win a healing blob fight. And if Enchantress isn't going to immediately bunker bust a bunch of infantry with fear and a bunch of undead infantry with fear and mist, your opponent's probably going to have enough chaff and enough trash in your way to stall you. Plus, your infantry is not going to be able to just shock its way through Tomb Guard. Neither is your cavalry, for that matter. So I think you're better off with Lewin there. I think that instead of... Now, I know you can bring Cheap Cav. I think Cheap Cav can be okay here just to get rear charges on the cheaper infantry, try to pressure backline troops. I think Questing Knights can also be decent. But personally, if you're looking for anti-large options in the air, I really like Royal Hippogriff Knights in this matchup because you can dive in. If you've got you always bring a Damsel with Life. You can dive in with your Hippogriff Knights and really pressure some units, especially on top with Lewin in the mix. You can just annihilate lords like Cetra or monsters like Necrosphinxes pretty effectively because of how much AP you're putting down very, very quickly. As for the rest of the build, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Foot Squires. I'd probably ditch the Foot Squires in favor of a bunch of Men-at-Arms. Peasant Bows with Fire Arrows, great unit in this matchup. Definitely would recommend it. Infantry-heavy builds can work, and I have done some just pure infantry builds, essentially, with like just a handful or sprinkling of cavalry. And those can definitely work. But, yeah, Peasant Bows with Fire Arrows, great in this matchup, in my opinion. Peasant Bows with Poison, also not bad for controlling big monsters and stuff like that. Especially if you're going more infantry-heavy. Foot Squires, though, I wouldn't recommend them. Beast Slayers, maybe, but Foot Squires I just don't think trade well enough with Tomb Guard. But regardless, well played to Marks D here. I do hope this video was a bit informative for you guys. Hopefully it showed you some stuff about some of the matchups and perhaps how to deal with some cheese a little bit. Obviously, that cheese game wasn't the most competitive or anything, but I did want to show it and show some strats too, or show how to approach those sorts of matches. Regardless, I do thank you all for watching. Leave your comments and critiques down below, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.